Story 1. Boudin Rouge. Maya recognized the monster at the door, though she'd never seen him before. He wasn't tall, only a few inches taller than herself. Nor was he muscular, though he seemed lithe enough to wrestle gators and win. His face might have been plain, but for the prominent cheekbones and square jaw. No, what stood out were his eyes. Those bright brown irises were almost golden and seemed to catch the light like an animal's, bright and blinking, assessing. "I know who you are," Maya said. "May I come in?" he asked, golden eyes gleaming with the patient joy of a cat playing with a mouse. "Don't suppose I can say no, can I?" "No," he replied with a slight shrug, and she noticed he was carrying plastic grocery bags. "But you still have to invite me in." Maya rolled her eyes as she opened the door further and said, "Come on in, Mr. Vampire." He slunk through the door, lithe indeed, she thought, and threw her small forward towards the kitchen. There was a pleasant scent in the air, a faint mixture of leather and plum. "I wasn't planning on cooking tonight," Maya said. He glanced back at her, the playful smile turning a little too toothy for her liking, and said, "I guess your plans have changed. Or do you need a reminder of what the contract states?" Maya thought of the contract, handed down mother to daughter for generations, and now sitting, yellowed with age, in a locked trunk in her kitchen. She'd read it twice, once with her mother as she explained its contents, once years later when curiosity made her try the ladle, and she shivered. Best not to think about that awful utensil. She'd experience it again soon. The sound of the vampire's boots on her kitchen tile brought her back to the present. He put the grocery bags on her kitchen counter before moving to sit at her kitchen breakfast nook across the room. The giant picture frame window behind him looked out on Main Street, where normal people were going about their normal lives. It was disconcerting how at home he was in her apartment. She felt like a stranger in her own home. Maya leaned against the counter as far as she could get in the room and studied him. He was perfectly at ease, blue young legs crossed, one arm hooked around the back of his chair, the collar of his shirt open, his Adam's apple, casting a small, enticing shadow. "Like what you see?" he asked with a smirk. She scoffed. "Don't kid yourself. Besides, you probably did it with my great-great-grandma or something. That puts you on the off-limits list." His gaze roamed her body, and she blushed despite herself. "What I've done with other man has no bearing on our arrangement. The arrangement, as I understand it, is to provide shelter and succor, nothing more. So don't go getting any strange ideas. Succor," he repeated slowly, pulling the word out, pronouncing it with more than the 2 syllables it required. Such a wonderful word. It can mean so many things. To provide protection, to provide assistance, to provide sustenance. Here he licked his lips and glanced at her neck. Some of the best words are practically gone from the language these days. Maya swallowed. "Oh, like what?" He street food and approach slowly. "Lovely words like organize, as in your beauty has completely organized me." She shivered as his eyes bore into hers. "Callipygian," he said, eyes traveling to her hips, as in woman. "You are killing me with that fine callipygian of yours." He stopped in front of her, leaning close. She could feel his breath as he whispered snout fair. A surprised laugh escaped her. She went to push him back, but her hands met solid resistance. He didn't move, and her stomach knotted, laughter dying away. You made that one up, she whispered, the hard counter digging into her backside as she leaned as far away from him as possible. His smile was gone, snout fair, as in you are a total snout fair, my. She'd seen men either desert the way. He looked at her now, her pulse beat erratically, warmth spreading through her. Unbidden, back up, she said. If I don't get started on the gumbo, we'll be here all night. He hesitated for a moment, staring into her eyes, before smiling and moving back to the chair. I've been dreaming about that gumboat, he said. It's been far too long. Maya bent over to pull the locked tiara from a bottom cabinet and blushed again, knowing he was looking at her backside. Actually, she said, hoping to distract him, I've been wondering, why didn't you ever visit my mother or grandma? They said you never did. I thought you might have died, he laughed. No, nothing so glamorous as death. I went to your great-grandmother for a meal before leaving for Europe. I'd missed the First World War and decided I should witness the Second. I enjoyed Europe, so I stayed. I only returned yesterday. What brought you back? He laughed. Would you believe me if I said you're gumbo? She gave him the side eye and he held his hands out. Okay, not just the gumbo, but it was a part of it. This is my home, my land. My people were here before the first of the slave boats, Brugge. HT yours to these shores. The French, Spanish, and English were all outsiders. I belong here. My bones belong here. While he spoke, Maya placed a large pot on the stove and was combining flour and oil into a roux, stirring constantly as it turned from a creamy white to a rich dark brown, the air filling with its malty scent. She'd been concentrating on not burning the roux so didn't notice the vampire bringing vegetables over to the cutting board to chop. The sting and sharp scent of onion, celery, and peppers assaulted her nose and eyes, drawing her attention. He'd slipped one of her frill white aprons over his shirt. Did you bring the sausages? She asked. MMMHMM, he murmured. Boudin Rouge, my favorite. In the bag over there, he said, nodding too. The bags on the counter next to him, the sausages were a deep maroon, almost black, and they smelled of pennies as she cooked them in a pan next to the cooling roux. She slid the brown sausages into the roux, deglazing the pan with broth before adding the trinity of vegetables. She was concentrating on cooking and jumped when she felt his hands at her waist. His body pressed lightly to hers, her heart beat erratically, and her head swam when she felt his breath on her neck. It's time for the ladle, he whispered, heat coursing from his breath and radiating through her body. There was something strong, healy intoxicating about being so close to a man strong enough to rip her limb from limb, but whom she was sure would not so long as the contract was in play, and maybe, even if the contract didn't prevent it. She looked at him over her shoulder, and her breath caught. Those golden eyes looked back only inches away. She felt him solid against her hand, and that moment would have given him everything if he'd asked. Instead, he pulled away, his absence a coldness across the length of her. She moved to the trunk and opened it. There lay the contract, somehow unrolled, his signature in a flowing script next to the name of her nine-times great-grandmother. Her signature a simple X. The scroll was dated February 12th, 1786. Just 10 years after the Declaration of Independence, though she doubted her ancestor knew anything about it. Louisiana wouldn't be purchased by the young country for another 17 years. Next to the contract lay the Lane's silver ladle. She'd put this off as long as she could. Stomach clenched and hands shaking, she reached out and grasped the cold handle. She heard them immediately, a jumble of voices aching directly to her mind. Feed Hayem, car for Hayem. She grabbed some shrimp and chicken, added them to the roux with the sausage, and poured the broth and vegetables in, adding spices with her left hand. She dipped the ladle in and stirred with her right. Stir the gumbo. Add the secret ingredient. Stinging heat radiated from her palm where she gripped the ladle. Drops of blood welled and slid down the silver and into the gumbo. He hungers, feed Hayam. Pruviide Suwukor, the voices echoed in her head, making her dizzy and nauseous. Only the pain in her palm kept her present and aware of the task at hand. She was close to fainting when the voices quieted and she painfully loosened her grip on the ladle. She glanced over at the vampire. He was staring at her, fangs extended in his open mouth as he sat at her table. The lights of cars on the street behind him. She ladled a bowlful before flinging the cursed ladle into the sink. If she ever touched the damn thing again, it would be too soon. She placed the bowl of gumbo in front of him. Skipping the spoon, he lifted the bowl to his face, noisily slurping and lapping at its contents. She stood in the corner and watched. When he finally put the bowl down, his tongue, grotesquely long, slithered out and licked his face clean. He stood and looked at her, hunger of a different sort in his eyes. "No," she said, and he paused, head cocked. "No, I won't sleep with you. Not like this. The contract said we'd feed you and give you shelter. Help you if we could. This was the price for you freeing Hattie, my ancestor." He stood there, head cocked to the side like a curious animal, golden eyes shining in the kitchen light. "But I'm not free. You see that, right? I'm just another slave woman, forced to do her master's bidding. Never mind you're brown and not white. Never mind you don't have me out in the fields picking the cotton. You can come here and demand what you want, and I can't say no. Well, I'm saying no now. You can have the gumbo, and if you need to stay for the day, there's a spare room with blackout curtains. You're welcome to it." She stepped towards him. "But this," she said, motioning between them, "this won't happen as long as it's required. Not as long as I'm a slave to you. You want to free me, and I'll consider it. You know I want to. I'm not fooling anyone here. You're terrifying and exciting and sexy, and yeah, I want to, but feeling like I have to drives me right up. Choice is sexy. Freedom is sexy." She was right in front of him now, and placed her hands against his firm chest, eyes staring into his. "Wouldn't you prefer that? Wouldn't you rather a free woman choose to be with you, to choose to feed you, instead of being compelled by a contract she didn't even sign?" Something in his eyes shift. He growled, and she felt her stomach flutter in fear and excitement. As he walked over to the trunk, his eyes fixed on hers, he took the contract and tore the old parchment in half. The rip echoing in her kitchen, no hesitation. After 2 centuries of careful guardianship and protection, the yellowed contract was in tatters, crumpled and tossed into her waste basket. Then he was holding her hand, a question in those depthless golden eyes. "And if I said no?" she asked. He swallowed, his muscles vibrating visibly. "Then I'd leave. Are you saying no. She squeezed his hand before leading him down the hallway and through the doorway to her bedroom. Story 2. The Vessel. Lewis stepped out for air into a night without witness. The scent of rain lingered in the St. Illness. He had spent the day at the print warehouse, running folding machines, cutters, and presses fed by ink. His hands still carried a pale smear of toner. His shoulders ached with the long day, and he paused in the dark to steady himself. The work had worn him sheer and left him wanting something he could not name. He lit a cigarette and leaned against a tree across from the alley. Smoke curled from his fingers in thin threads. A figure appeared at the far end of the street. A woman with her coat unbuttoned, walking under the street lamps, her red hair catching the light. She walked as though the night were making room for her. Lewis watched her approach. She stopped a few feet from him, close enough for the space between them to tighten. "Can I G?" At a light, her voice was warm-edged and rough, admitting neither weariness nor grace. He held out his lighter. She stepped close and bent her head toward the flame. A lock of her hair slipped darker across her cheek. In that thin circle of light, he noticed a pale ring around her throat. It was a collar cut from bone or something that looked like bone. He could not place her age. Light ever. A passing car brushed her face and left no clues. "Thank you," she said. ... She took a long drag and exhaled toward the street. She studied the row of dark windows as if they hid figures she was waiting to see. Lewis stayed silent at first. Something in her posture held him in abeyance. "You live around here 2 buildings down," he said. "You block most nights." She nodded and brushed ash from her coat sleeve. "What brings you out?" he asked. "Heat," she said. "I felt it halfway up the street. That's the warehouse behind us. They run machines through the night." "No," she said, "not that." She stepped closer. Not enough to touch him, but enough for him to feel the air change between them. Her eyes held a strange brightness, as if lit from within. "You feel it, don't you?" "Feel what?" "The pull." Lewis felt it then, clear enough to name a warning, small and precise, like the first ache before a fever. He stayed where he was and looked at the cigarette between his fingers. His chest drew inward, slow and uninvited. He tried to blame the smoke, the hour, the emptiness of the street, but something in her tone made the excuse fall flat. "I'm Vera." She let the name fall between them with a quiet claim. "Lewis," he said. Her gaze moved over his shoulder toward the alley's dark opening. Lewis turned. Nothing stood there, only brick and darkness. When he looked back, her eyes stayed fixed on the same spot. She dropped her cigarette and crushed it under her heel. "Let's take a walk." "Where?" "Toward the current." "What current?" She smiled, not answering. Something swelled beneath his ribs, insistent, not fear, not excitement, something other. "What do you want?" he asked. "A hand for now." The street stayed silent around them. Lewis reached out without knowing why. Their fingers touched. His breath seized a wire drawn to fast through flesh. Her eyes widened in recognition, as if she felt something rise through his skin and move toward her palm. "There," she whispered. "I knew it." The word landed wrong. He understood, too late, that she had not found something new. She had located something already leaking. He tried to pull back. She kept his hand, her grip firm without force. "It begins," she said. "If you step away now, it always follows you. If you stay, it opens." "What opens?" Something primary, she said, ours, yours, the flow. A sound rose from the alley, a soft scrape, like shifting weight. Lewis turned again, only darkness. When he faced her once more, her lips were pressed together, not in restraint, but in calculation. Come, she said. The word fell into him and did not stop. He felt the want beneath. The world she offered, the city state dark. Far off, a siren rose, then died. Wind rolled through the alley, swirling dust and scraps of paper. Across the pavement, you carry it, she said. He curled his fingers without thinking. I carry more than I mean to. She reached toward his chest. Her fingers did not touch him, yet the hair on his arms lifted as if her hand brushed his skin. He felt a small collapse, a motion inside him, not outward but inward toward her. Vera lowered her hand. There's a bar on Carroll Lane, she said. Let's go there. Vera led him across the city toward the river, past shuttered stores and sleep-starved windows. Whatever the day had taken from him had not returned. His head throbbed. Why? A dull, persistent weight. Still, he kept walking. Carroll Lane hid between two taller streets. The buildings there leaned over each other like watchers drawn toward the same trace. Hubel, the bar, stood above a pawn shop with a window full of old radios, watches, and hand tools. No sign hung above the stairwell. A thick curtain of tobacco and clove drifted down the steps. At the top, they entered a narrow room lit by lamps, whose shades filtered light through tired paper. The finish on the bar was worn down to the grain. The patrons watched them with the wary stillness of animals testing the air. Vera led him to a table near the back. She removed her coat and placed it in the booth beside her. The collar at her throat gleamed like ivory. Her hair spilled arrow on her shoulders. Lewis sat across from her. The lamp cast a warm ring across the scarred table. Her eyes were bright, clear as glass held near flame. What is this place? He asked. A crossing for what? She tapped her nails. Whatever can't hold its place. You know that from sitting and watching. I know it by scent. He felt a tremor in his spine. What do you want from me? Her fingers traced the rim of her glass. Some carry cold at their core. You don't? The lamp flickered. Something in the shadows moved. A man rose from a booth, crossed the room, then stepped down the stairs without a sound. Nobody looked up. What are you? Lewis asked. She smiled, not with kindness, with recognition. We are the vessels. We? Vessels? For what? For what moves through? Lewis nodded, a reflex dressed as compliance. And when it moves, Vera lit a cigarette. Smoke rose as she held his gaze. We feed. On people, on contact, she said. On what loses hold between bodies. When they touch, she extended her hand. Give me your wrist. He hesitated. Her gaze cut into him. You fall. Ode, he placed his wrist in her palm. Her touch brought no heat at first. Then warmth spread from her fingers to his pulse, then to the bone beneath, then through his arm. The air in the bar thickened around him. His breath faltered as warmth left his wrist. Her pupils widened, then steadied, as if something in her had settled. For a moment her jaw tightened, as if she were holding back a shiver, and Lewis sensed not hunger but strain, like a conduit, forced to carry more than it should. That is strong. Lewis tried to pull back. She held him without effort, not force. Niece, city, let go, he said. Not yet. He felt something leave him, Not heat, not strength, something deeper. A thread of thought or desire or memory. He could not name it. A part of him sought purchase, too, toward her hand, toward her shape, toward the pale ring. Around her throat, Vera released him. Louis moved back from the table. His wrist throbbed with a pressure that wanted, without knowing what. "What did you just take?" he said. "What you offered." "I didn't offer anything. You were already past deciding. The price agreed upon before you noticed," she said. A man stood near their table, close enough for Louis to feel his presence. His attention rested on Louis with naked hunger. Vera shifted her hand slightly, and the man's eyes flicked away. He left without speaking. Louis S. pushed his chair back. "I need air," he said. He crossed the room, took the stairs fast, and stepped into the night, something unaccounted for. Asterisk. He did know. Sleep. In the early hours he sat in his small apartment and held his wrist under the light. No mark appeared, but the skin felt tender. A pulse beat there with a strange rhythm, as if not entirely his. A warmth rose up his arm. He thought of her fingers, her eyes, the small shift of her breath as something in him entered her. He felt a sick want toward that moment. Not lust, not love, but a need for touch that held danger. The next evening he swore he would stay home, but at midnight he found himself climbing the stairs on Carroll Lane again. Vera was waiting. He sat across from her. His hand shook as he set them on the table, the skin there, thinner now, veins showing, as if something vital had already begun to recede. "What happens to me now?" Louis asked. Patron's faces would not settle, eyes held, and slid slightly out of place as if the room were breathing. She reached across the table and touched his jaw. Her hand slid to his throat. "You become like us." Louis felt cold at the base of his spine. "Will I die?" "No, but what you carry won't stay where it is." "I don't want this. You want me," she said. He said nothing. "Come." She rose and led him to the back room. The door closed behind them. With a soft click, a cot stood against the wall beneath 3 low bulbs. She guided him to it, then knelt beside him. "Give me your hands," she said. He lifted them toward her. Her mouth touched his wrist. Teeth pressed against his skin. A pull opened inside him, deep and wrong, as if something had found an exit. Heath went still. His vision swayed. Something tightened, deeper now, not at the surface, but in his marrow. Something in him slid toward her mouth. He cried out. She lifted her head. He pressed his hand to the bite. "You're tearing something out of Emmy." "No, I am opening you." He rose from the couch. His heart pounded against his ribs. Sweat ran down his neck. He pushed past her, staggering for the door. He found his way out of the bar and left Carroll Lane altogether. Louis walked 3 miles that night past the river and into the bright spill of a 24-hour diner. He sat at the counter drinking black coffee, staring at the payphone on the wall. He lifted the receiver twice, his fingers stalling over the numbers of someone he could trust. Each time he had it back down. The thought of explaining, of saying the words aloud, felt impossible, as if naming it would only tighten the thread already pulling at his chest. By dawn he was walking again, the city spent and indifferent around him. In the afternoon he sat at his kitchen table with a dull fog hazing his thoughts. He tried to rise, but dizziness forced him back down. He drank water and felt it settle. heavy in his stomach. His arms shook when he lifted the glass. He called in sick. In the bathroom mirror, his eyes looked farther back. The whites dull to gray. He ouched his cheek and felt the skin loosen, as though the bones beneath had shifted away from the surface. A new ache rose within him, quiet, insistent, like a hand settling at the base of his throat. He felt Vera's absence, a candle in a room he could not enter. The day passed without shape. The walls offered no safety. Shadows curled at the corners of the room. When he closed his eyes, he saw Vera's face near his own, her mouth at his throat, her fingers on his heart. He recognized the shape of the choice, not yes or no, the narrow middle where he would blame himself afterward for having stood there and let it happen. At sunset, a knock sounded at the door. He opened it. Vera entered without waiting. "You can't stay here, you will draw in, you will slip, you need the current. I want my life back." He wanted it at once, without conditions. He wanted a day that did not ask anything of him. "You never claimed it while it was yours." She touched his chest. His breath hitched, his knees weakened. He leaned against the wall to steady himself, noticing how his shoulders had narrowed, his shirt hanging looser. "I can stop what comes next. I can keep you moving." He closed his eyes. "What happens if I refuse?" "You fall alone, and if I accept, you enter the stream." He swallowed, his throat burned. "Will I remember myself? Pieces, enough to know you once held a name." He opened his eyes. Her face hovered near his, her mouth wet with hunger. He leaned forward. A quiet forfeiture. Her arms slid around him, and the current rushed in. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Months later, a man named Jerome crossed Hyde Street after sundown and saw a woman move out of an alley and into his path. Her hair carried the color of copper in firelight. A pale ring circled her throat. Her eyes fixed on him with quiet intent. But a light, he met her gaze, and saw it there, a dim shape pressing through the dark behind her eyes. A face, not a reflection, a figure caught inside the fold of the world, watching with a patient hunger. Vera offered her hand. Jerome hesitated. A warmth rose from below his gut. The current reached for him. Somewhere inside her, Louis drifted among the others. No sleep, no dream, no voice, only the steady drag through. Unseen bodies remained drawn to touch, and to the warmth that kept the chain alive. Story 3. Late Night Caller. "Alan, do you still love me?" The whiskey G last leaps from my hand and explodes on the floor, but I barely notice. The phone is tight against my ear. "Lucy, wait, double quotes." I stop myself, embarrassed at my own stupidity. "Alan, you're a goddamn defense attorney. Act like one. Why did you leave me out here, Alan, where it's so cold?" Over the phone, wind is blowing through trees. I know how bitterly loaded is out there. Hours after getting home, my swollen red toes are still itching and tingling. Every muscle aches from dragging her through snow for what seemed like an hour, until I spotted a dense copse of trees. I was alone out there, in no man's land, amidst 1,000 square miles of empty forest land. By then her skin was ice cold, her cheeks hard to the touch. I positioned her beneath a dense cluster of bushes that scratched me up. Then I stood over her to catch my breath, regain my composure. God damn it, I'm sure she was dead. "WH, who is this?" I stammer. then swallow hard. I sound so lame, they'll figure this out. They'll find you, she continues, and I hear the liquid, suctioning movements of her lips, her tongue, like she's inside the phone, her mouth, an inch from my ear, her lipstick stain, teeth nearly knitting my earlobe. Last week, her intimate eyes, her hot-out breath, her clever tongue aroused me for hours. Now her seductions stab me with dread. I feel sick, a wave of dizziness hits, and things start going black. I drop ass first to the floor to avoid splitting my head on the hardwood. Partway down, the cord tenses and jerks my phone from the end table. It crashed to the floor beside me, its metal bell ringing into silence. What's this about? I think you called the wrong Allen. Ma'am, I Don. T sound very convincing. I press the phone harder to my ear until it hurts. Why does this chunk of bakelite suddenly feel so heavy? My hand trembles, and I struggle to keep my grip, despite my flannel robe and slippers, and the roaring fireplace. I feel colder than when I got home, and is this really Lucy, or maybe? Yes, Betty, her roommate Betty. Relief floods through me. I have to call her bluff. Betty, do you know what time it is? I have closing arguments and just for hours. I'm not happy. Silly boy, she says. Betty went to bed hours ago. I tried to recall the tone of her flat mate's voice. She was shy and hardly said a word. Our flats are 2 miles apart, both leased before Lucy and I met. She'd been living there with Betty for 5 years. To be close to work, I rented men near the courthouse, and I lived here Monday to Friday. I only spent weekends at my official home with Emily at Chaseburn Manor. Tell me something only Lucy knows, I demand, or I'm hanging up. Did you do something to her? Harm her? What? Are you jealous of her? I'm feeling more confident now. Lucy's out there, stiff as a board, but I have to place this angle. Then I wonder, is Betty trying to blackmail me? I can't bear thinking of how to deal with that. Oh, I can tell you a lot of things that are just between you and me. Lover. I can tell she's smiling, and my anger flares. She says, her tone playful. Where to start? There's wind again over the phone, and then some kind of low-pitched animal knows it so. Sounds like a large owl hooting. There aren't any owls within miles of Lucy's flat. No, this call is coming from out there. Here's one. She says you felt so guilty about bludgeoning me to death that you tucked my red scarf snugly around my neck to keep me warm. And you called me a fucking bitch when that sharp thistle scratched your cheek as you dragged my corpse into the trees. Ring any bells? I reach up to my face and trace my fingertip along the narrow, lightly scabbed scratch on my cheek. She's still smiling, I can tell, and then she chuckles. Did Betty follow me? Could she have been hiding in the back seat of my car? It was dusk by then, so I mightn't have noticed her. Could she have followed me in a taxi with the lights off because she suspected something? Go to bed, Betty, and leave me alone. Like always, you're delusional. I slam the phone down, my heart racing. Then I clamber to my feet, being careful to avoid the broken glass. I have to call out sick tomorrow. It'll piss everyone off, especially Judge Myers, but there's no way I can face court. From my liquor cabinet, I remove an unopened fifth of Old Forester, a long W. With a clean tumbler. A minute later, I'm sitting on my velvet wingback and slugging back shots. I notice the phonograph perched on the middle shelf in the bookcase, so I stand awkwardly and walk over to it. My legs wobbly. That big band record is still on the platter. I switch it on and cue up the needle, the volume knob set on low. I stand back and wait for Glenn Millard to distract me. "It's so cozy here tonight," says a voice from the record player. "Lucy." I pull the needle from the record with a ripping sound, then lower it again at the outer edge. After some cracks and pops, she says, "You'll wear out the needle. Just let it play while the two of us enjoy each other's company. And thanks for building up the fireplace. It feels so toasty in here. I mess. Teachless. This is the same goddamn record I played earlier today." As she continues her prattling, the volume begins to swell without me ever touching the controls. I twist the volume knob back and forth to no effect. I don't want to wake the neighbors. Dear God, I cannot let them hear this. That's when I see my own breath condensing in small puffs, like it did outside. I should call Betty to let her know I won't be home tonight. I hate her worrying for no reason. She's lovely, you know. Such a mother hen. Oh, and I'll call Emily, too. The woman whose fortune vaulted you into the ranks of the elite, the woman you promised you'd leave for the last 3 years. I've always felt jealous of her, but fair is fair, and she need to get her ducks in a row for your trial. She used to look out for her own best interests. Then I shatter, my resolve scattering like so many bits of crystal on the floor. I look to my kitchen. I remember Lucy making us breakfast. How she opened the hot egg with the dull edge of a knife. That's what she was doing, making us French toast. This morning, when we fought, when she gave me her ultimatum, leave Emily or she'd ruin me. I am shivering now. I feel myself slipping off the edge of a very tall cliff, beyond which there is no purchase, nothing to slow my fall. I wish this were a nightmare, a hallucination. Good God, Alan, you're the sanest man I know. This is all very real, I assure you. Now her voice is booming, so loud it rattles an ashtray on the table. Fighting with my numb, stiff limbs, I struggle over to the wall outlet and yank out the record player's cord. But Lucy continues. Defeated, I stare hypnotized at the spinning record label as she drones on and on, my ears ringing. Then, despite all the booze in my blood, my veins turn to ice, and the lights go out. Epilogue. Clouds stream through a cold, gunmetal sky. Below, a snowy landscape dotted with clumps of trees ends to the horizon. A single-lane road, recently plowed, meanders across the vast expanse. Along its shoulder sits a black Mercedes coupe. Show drifted halfway up the headlights, the driver's door, ND trunk hanging open. To detectives in trench coats inspect the scene. They appear patient, methodical despite the morning's numbing cold. 3 police cars sit behind the Mercedes, their engine idling to keep them from freezing in -30 degrees. A chaotic set of footprints, positioned at all angles and spacings, extends from the car and out across the landscape, their SB wrinkled like pepper along the edges of a wide, deep gouge in the snow. 100 feet along the tracks, 2 uniformed officers stand over a frozen body of a man wearing a light jacket. One of them stoops and points to a deep set of scratches on the man's face, visible on his upturned cheek. There's a shot from the distance, and both men look up as 2 more officers argue. GH toward them. There's a body, a woman, almost a mile out. One of them says while struggling to catch his breath, her head's bashed in. "We need more guys out here. Smith is gar. Den the scene for now, but he's gonna freeze in an hour soon." All four officers are standing around the corpse. The man's skin looks pale and hard. "Frozen solid, the bastard sure was in a hurry." One of them says, "Didn't even think to bring a heavier coat." Still, after a mile out there and back, he was only 100 feet short. One of the officers remains with the body while the others join the detectives. Soon, one of them is on the radio. In his cruiser, he requests more assistance, including the coroner, as he reads off the information on the dead man's driver's license. Alan Poe, age 45, just checked his ID. A deep voice says over the radio's bursts of static, "The newspaper's gonna have a field day with this one high-profile case. We'll send someone over to notify the wealthy widow." Outside the cruiser, a mile away in a dense stand of trees, a young woman lies frozen on her side. Despite her twisted limbs, her bloody forehead, a bright red scarf is tucked close around her neck to keep her warm. Story 4. When there's a saying, a small pebble dropped into a pound has the potential to create the largest of ripples. Clearly, the theme here is despite how minor or trivial something appears to be, capable of creating astronomical ripples throughout an entire universe. The following story provides a perspective of an intelligent, caring, kind-hearted man named Courtnall, who becomes dreary, eclipsing his friends, loved ones, and eventually his world into obscurity. This is courtesy to an ordinary action Courtnall received from someone evoking a fantasy nightmare. We begin our story at the Arizona State Fair. It's late at night during the graveyard shift composed of 5 CSR. Alex is one of the CS are making her routine rounds, which checks to be normal until she hears a thrashing sound, preceded a short painful scream. Alex cautiously searches through the night, tracking the commotion to a nearby barnyard where Alex discovers an astonishing revelation. "Courtnall, is that you?" Alex asked. Alex stands in disbelief as she stares towards a fellow CSR who's also a dear friend named Courtnall, battered and blooded, lay out on the floor. Why is Alex stunned by this, you might be asking? Alex spent her break with Courtnall dressed in a standard CSR uniform just an hour ago. Despite how suspicious of the current situation of questions, Alex decides to go against her good judgment and help the injured Courtnall. It's that very moment Alex uncovers a startling discovery. Courtnall has sent the man she worked and hang out with all these years. She discovers this while attending Courtnall's injuries. This led to Alex touching Courtnall's body, having a watery skin texture feeling. Shortly after, Courtnall's facial appearance starts to match it. Alex quickly breaks away from Courtnall, placing several feet of distance between the two of them. Alex wisely radio and for assistance. Coincidentally, the first CES are to respond is Courtnall, perplexing Alex even more. "Wait, please don't leave. I can explain everything. Just stay with me," Courtnall said. This Courtnall's voice gives off a sound as if his mouth is full of water. However, Alex decides to grant Courtnall's plea, but take precautions by radio and for backup. "I don't think it's wise radio your FR. Ian's saying you found a wounded copy of Courtnall Courtnall said. Indeed, that's why I texted them, Alex said. Courtnall barely smiles, discovering how smart Alex was on her feet. Courtnall informs Alex he's from a different universe almost like hers. You don't say. What happened to it, and how did you get here? Alex asked. I happened escaping as a result. Courtnall replied. Courtnall flashes back while telling Alex of his story, answering the questions: where he's from, why he was here, how did he arrive here, and others pending important questions. Courtnall starts at his versi on of the Arizona State Fair. Only his version consists of black, reddish skies complement monstrous mini-size Volkswagen flying brass soars down, gripping their razor-shaped claws into people, flying them hundreds of feet in the air, drooping some and ripping apart others. Below the fairground lays multiple of humans, bloody, broken, and tore bodies. Given the brutal, sinister, hellish description, it fails in comparison of the true terror. A skyscraper-sized black, purplish, female, demonic creature stands over this nightmarish scene, while basking in the terror. Seconds later, the monstrous female entity turns its attention towards three cages, all dangling from the highest point off the grandstand, and stares with a sinister glare. Meanwhile, outside the Arizona State Fair grounds, perimeter was military and the National Guard fully surrendering the perimeter, where they attempted several strategies to penetrate through a strange yellowish silky substance's cocoon around the fairground arena, but fail every time, nearly assuring demonic supreme reign. However, there were some brave souls reluctant or stubborn to concede their lives. Few in numbers, but strong in bravery, the remaining CES are led by Alex Journey, though the hellish fairgrounds combating devilish monsters. Tragically, some CS didn't survive the end of Journey, which was the grandstand. Very CES casualty. Alex weighed with guilt. Eventually, in time, she would become nearly numb to the causalities. Alex becomes enraged with herself, pondering she's turning into Courtnall, that soulless bastard responsible for this nightmare. Alex focuses on the simple but deadly task ahead: stop the gigantic female monstrous entity by capturing or killing its master, Courtnall. Alex dread the thought of taking Courtnall's life, despite the many lives killed, all due to his vengeful heart unleashing these hellish monsters. Alex locates Courtnall sitting on a thorn midsection of the grandstand. Alex carefully P.S. behind Courtnall while reminiscing of past times she shared with Courtnall, also the event that would ultimately lead Courtnall into this dark path. One day, working a night shift at the fairgrounds, Courtnall worked with another CSR named Melissa for the first time. Their time together working wasn't long, but Melissa tells Courtnall she's impressed by his smarts and dreams of becoming a scientist one day. That simple gesture done by Melissa becomes the catalyst. Besides Alex, Melissa was only female to show genuine support to Courtnall's dream, but she was married, so Courtnall came up with the idea seeking out a female who resembles Melissa. Several months later, Courtnall successful finding such a female named Rosetta. Unfortunately, Rosetta didn't share the similar race, active personality as Melissa, using Courtnall's love and caring heart for her own selfish agenda. This resulted in Courtnall dropping out of school, bittered to life itself, including his family, eventually hanging with undeserving individuals. During his Sparrow downfall, Courtnall disappears for a while, leaving everyone who knew him and acquainted with Courtnall's whereabouts aren't CL. Here, however, it said his madness drove him into the teachings of the occult, utilizing his scientific intelligence to enhance it. What's clear is Courtnall returned to the Arizona State Fair attached and empowered with supernatural abilities, thus bringing this hell on earth. Flew in a maddening rage using his scientific intelligence, casting the current hell upon today. You don't deserve a woman like Melissa. Still, I wonder what Melissa would think of you if she could see you now, Alex asked. Courtnall slowly stands up from his throne, donning an unhinged smirk on his face. See, it's been nearly a year since they stood face to face. To Alex, her friend looks detached for humanity, but Courtnall, on the other hand, is pleased to see Alex. Hello, bestie. Looks like you've been through some battles, Courtnall said. Yea, no thanks to you, Alex said. Courtnall offers to clean up Alex and the rest of the CSRS if only she would submit to him. Of course, Alex declines his offer and informs Courtnall this is where his madness ends. Courtnall didn't take pleasure one calling him madness, so he orders his gigantic, dark purplish female silhouette to lower the 3 cages thus are, leaving 3 individuals. Courtnall asks Alex to choose one of them, but she refuses to play Courtnall's game. It made no difference to Courtnall granting his giant, dark, purplish female monster choose picking the first of 3 cages, revealing a black, middle-aged male inside. Courtnall becomes overjoyed with his demonic breast's choice, shouting his praise to it. Raymond hails the piece of shit I became later acquainted with during decent in life right after Rosetta ripped my heart out, Courtnall said. Courtnall continues, stating Raymond used him just like Rosetta used him, but this time it was for money. Courtnall is disgusted by a man, manipulates another man for anything, later calling Raymond a disgrace to men. I entrust the punishment to you, my giant friend, Courtnall said. The gigantic, shadow-covered monster female acknowledges Courtnall's order and grabs Raymond from his cage. The giant female monsters cover Raymond with both hands, while horrific screams are heard coming within the demon's hands. The screams are silent. Only odd animal sound is later heard. The female demon slowly opens both her hands, revealing this monster has turned Raymond into a troll-like beast from hell. Alex is terrified to witness something so sinister. Please, Alex, this guy Raymond is the reason why the world fucked up, Courtnall said. The second cage chosen by the monstrous female giant happens to be Rosetta herself. Courtnall is slightly taken by surprise by this reveal, seeing a crying Rosetta gradually crawling out the cage. Courtnall relishes the sight of Rosetta's pathetic state. That's shortly interrupted by his dark, purplish giant female monster speaks in a deep voice. Lines place a spell upon her granting to do as you wish, the giant female monster said it would. Please, Courtnall, nothing more using Rosetta, she deems just as she did before. How he deems fit as Rosetta. However, Courtnall takes the opportunity to conversate with her. Rosetta is fully willing to be him and cooperate with his heart's desires, then kisses him. At first Courtnall stood quiet, then became teary-eyed. This left both Alex and Rosetta lost. All I wanted was to love you, but your rapt, sick mind wouldn't allow that. The hell with you, bitch, Courtnall said. Rosetta is then sent into a portal where he will live out an interloop of all her bad relationships. Courtnall, end this madness before it's too late. Alex shouts, "It's too late already," Courtnall said. Courtnall orders to bring down the final cage. The monstrous black-purplish monster does so. Only this time Courtnall experiences an unpleasant surprise. "Melissa, what the hell she's doing here?" Courtnall asked. Melissa D. drops out of the cage tire and is scared. Before her body reaches the ground, Courtnall catches her in his arms. As the scared Melissa lays in his arm, Courtnall ensures Melissa everything will be fine, only to be the a sight. The demonic female giant ignores Courtnall's question at first, but Courtnall continues shouting at the gigantic female breast evokes it to reveals its sinister plan of possessing Melissa's body. What? No, Melissa is the loving person I know, and she will not be harmed this I command, Courtnall said. You pose nitrogen monoxide control over me. I will pose Melissa and have impregnate me, spawning first of many children, the giant female monster said. Courtnall glares with towards the female monster having to yet be used once more. Meanwhile, Alex is in chills after hearing the giant female monster's plan. Nevertheless, Alex develops a plan, using the monster's betrayal for advantage. Now your big ugly monster girlfriend wants the woman you can only dreams of. It looks like you need help, Alex said, wasting no time. Courtnall pulls out a round spear and throws it to the giant demonic female. The spear beaks released a liquid substance that began burning the giant monster. Quickly, Alex, follow behind me, Courtnall said. Alex didn't trust Courtnall, but she had very little choice. That liquor isn't going to stop the female monster. Courtnall carries Melissa with Alex and what's left of the CS are to the south end of the fairgrounds, where Courtnall gently lays down Melissa and starts to perform a ritual involving magic and science, resulting in a portal. Tenning, go and take Melissa with you. I will hold off the monasty. Double quotes. Courtnall is too late. The monster has recovered and smashes the rest of CSR, launching Alex, Courtnall, and Melissa into the air. Courtnall quickly gets on his feet. He then hears Alex screaming his name, causing him to face her direction. Courtnall wept as he sees Alex holding a lifeless Melissa's body, equipped with the ability of telekinesis. Courtnall levitates a large half of a building and throws it in the monster direction, crucially injuring it on top of the monster. He then takes one final glance at Alex before apologizing for all the destruction and deaths he has caused. Now go, this planet has seen its loss, Courtnall said. Alex jumps inside the portal while bursts of explosion are seen behind her. Fast forward to the current time, where a wounded Courtnall lays out. He continues apologizing to Alex, still with guilt for all the deaths and destruction he caused. Courtnall then reaches out to Alex. She grabs hold of it. Alex pleads for Courtnall to hold on, but Courtnall gives in to injuries the best of him. With his dying breath, Courtnall tells Alex to remind her, Courtnall, to never forget who you are. Sure, I will, but when? Alex asked. Courtnall dies and his body melts down into a puddle of water. Seconds later, Courtnall enters the barnyard, enticing Alex upset. Courtnall asks Alex what's wrong and where's the emergency. With a saddened expression, Alex simply stares at Courtnall while asking the question, ... When is the day do I need to remind you of who you are before you turn to madness destroying all of humanity? Alex asked. Story 5. A Moderated Evil. In those days I sometimes traveled the frontier alone on foot, horse, or mule, but more often I accompanied a delivery cart, a group of settlers with their wagons, or a picket of soldiers transiting outposts. This served the dual purpose of providing me with company while also allowing me to discharge a portion of my contract with Duke Barras, which explicitly was to protect, aid, and serve the citizens of the Duchy of Barras in a manner that befit my talents. The implicit aspect of the contract, more suitable for the smoky, velvet-walled rooms of desperate, powerful men, was to prevent my settling in one place, making ties, becoming acceptable, a terrestrial contract striving to mitigate a celestial one. My kind was and is a moderated evil. Mustn't stare. Love, the young mother sitting across the coach, why, spared in her daughter's ear, the sharp-eyed girl, perhaps 5 years old, stood between her mother's legs, treading gray mud on the tattered hem of the woman's skirts, and, as in the case of the 20 Prev. IOU's admonishments over as many miles, the child continued to stare at the sedate black of my woolen trousers and suit jacket, striving to contain the rebellious fuchsia of the linen shirt beneath, at my black bowler hat with the silvery gray, five-lobed, sinkful symbol of my dread patron Baal Abbas, at the matching symbol cursed into both my cheeks, eyelids, earlobes, the sides of my neck, the palms of my hands, and other places the child could not see or would ever see if she were fortunate. I winked at the child. She leaned back, eyes wide, into her mother's warm protection. I don't mind, I said, flicking my eyes up to the woman. She flinched away. It was the first I'd spoken since joining them in the coach in Sandalwood, when my presence had silenced the bubbling conversation I'd heard through the thin walls. I'd observed the familiar full cycle: shock at my sudden presence, disgust at my mottled visage, the desperate scan for routes of escape, dark resignation, and the subsequent protective drawing in of her girls. The hours since had been filled with whispers, gasps, and stares. If only Baal Abbas's appetites could be sated with whispers, gasps, and stares. Your face is dirty, said the girl's older sister, propped up on the thinly padded seat at her mother's side, her toes just reaching the floor. My speaking seemed to have loosened her tongue. They're my decorations, I said. I did a visual check-in with her mother, who sat stiffly, eyes closed, teeth clenched. I took her submission as permission. Do you like tea? The girl, who was perhaps 12, freckled and serious, considered for a moment, then deferred with, do they hurt? How to answer? Did I want my 3 companions to cry in primal horror, clawing at their eyes, tearing their hair, plunging their fingernails deep into their own plump skin, digging and peeling, ruptured ligaments popping, as fat, sinew, and muscle separate from glistening bone in a squinching, pulsing riot of warm, wet, red? No, a lie then, not much. Her squinty eyes hinted at her skepticism, but she didn't pursue it. Where'd you get children, especially those from these farther reaches, were often my best conversation partners. Hadn't seen my kind around, didn't know they should be repulsed and nauseated by a dread saint. They were painstakingly and lovingly applied by my dire patron, the primordial thing Baal Abbas. My deep voice echoed discordantly as my lips formed his name, eliciting a sharp exhalation from the monster's nose. The child paused to take this in. Just then the coach juddered through a rut in the road, and she fell forward off the seat. I caught her before she hit the floor, the mother gasping. She wrenched her daughter back, rewarding my service with a contemptuous glare of warning. Unperturbed, the older daughter continued our conversation. "What's your name?" "I'm called Missa." I gave her my professional name, Crux. She felt the gravely shape of the word in her mouth. "Missa," I said, drawing it out into a breath, waggling my head like a top nearing the end of its span. There were bangs on the wall behind my head, and from the driver's seat I heard a whistle. I slid open the panel to the driver's box. Dust puffed in my face, and I blinked it away. Might be trouble brewing. It was the shotgun. Henley, if I recalled correctly. "You want to get up here." I closed the panel and turned to my companions. "If you lines excuse me." I climbed up on my seat and popped open the roof hatch. Then, with one hand on each side of the portal and a boot on a small ledge behind my seat, I hauled myself up onto the roof of the coach. "No, don't stop," Henley yelled to the driver, a broad, flat-eyed gentleman named Dusty. Then to me. "There." And there he pointed to spots on the horizon, one on each side of T. He rode on the right, atop a bluff on the left, hidden in a stand of cedar horsemen. Crouching on the coach roof, I nodded. Then, with my left hand protecting my bowler from the wind, I placed my right hand over my right eye, symbol to symbol, like plunging from a 30-foot cliff into a spring lake. The sick, familiar feeling pummeled me. Millions of ravenous insects, scrabbling, chewing, digging their way fleeing from my core. I clenched my teeth. It was the terrible electric radiance of my power, Baal Abbas's gift. My eyesight thus enhanced, I examined our would-be attack. R.S., the one on the bluff, tall and rangy, black hat, resting on the withers of a sorrel quarter horse with a white star. His blood was icy. Today was a day that the sun rose, and this was an hour that started at the top. Also, he had a bad tooth that wanted pulling and was in need of spectacles. This last bit was unfortunate, as it washed away the deterrent effect of the dread saint garments I wore. I'd prevented many attacks just by being present, but today would be a fight. I was not overly upset. Sometimes the gremlins needed out. The second rider, in the trees, was in actuality too, a shaggy lump of muscle on a stocky gray quarter horse with bowed tendons in both its front legs, a skinny boy with an old rifle and a new hat, crouching next to his saddlebags in front of a chestnut Morgan. The man was sleepy, but the boy's heart raced and his face was flushed. I rotated in my perch to scan in a full circle, and spotted a fourth rider, a Oman and a grimy duster, trailing us. There was no turning back. Their plan was simple. The lookout on the bluff would charge down at us from the right, shooting and whooping like a maniac. We'd turn left, to take shelter in the stand of trees, only to find two more attackers there, but by then we're off-road and slow. Pot committed, and if we spotted them early, as we had, or if the attack started and we had our wits about us, if we tried to turn back, we'd run into our shadow. Simple. probably had been effective for them in the past. Maybe even count their victims into not fighting back, if they were. The best kind of bandits. Nothing got hurt except some egos and strong box locks. And if they were the worst kind, well, their victims might yearn for a quick death, but it didn't matter. Not today. Intent. Even the glint off the glimmer of a thought of doing injustice was sufficient to draw Baal Abbas's heavy-lidded gaze, and as its agent, its dread saint, I was compelled to act. One rider behind and two in the trees, I said to Henley. The guard set his jaw and nodded. We'll spring it, but patting the driver's shoulder, we stay on the road to me, then you can justify your existence. Henley was a practical, unsentimental man, didn't mind my methods, maybe even approved of them. He wasn't alone in that room, but it echoed inside and its door. I was hidden. We barreled on, like wolves to the slaughter, while Henley busied himself queuing up stashed rifles, shotguns, and bags of ammunition. I cracked the hatch open and stuck my face in. Highwaymen ahead, I said. It's gonna be a fight. The mother gasped and pulled her daughters in. The tiny girl sensed her mother's panic and buried her face, wailing, and the woman's skirts. You might want to get down on the floor, I said. Nissa pushed from under her mother's arm, strained her neck up at me, and said, "What are you gonna do?" I flicked the brim of my bowler and said, "Make him pay." I closed the hatch. When I turned around, the rider on the bluff had already begun his charge down the hill, waving his black hat like a pirate flag and hollering like we were cattle in a chute. When he'd traveled half the distance, he donned the hat and pulled a rifle from his leg scabbard. "Keep on, Dusty," Henley said to the driver, and raised his own rifle. "Yeah," Dusty yelled. "Now, Tommy." The four-in-hand, a team of mighty Percherons he'd picked up at the last stage in Sandalwood, charged ahead. About this time I tee up tall, steadying myself on the narrow that surrounded the roof. I wanted to give them one last chance to see me, see their folly, and let us pass. For my trouble, the lookout aimed down his rifle and fired too far for any accuracy, but his intention was clear. So be it. Baal Abbas would have its victuals. The rider reached the road and stopped about 200 yards away, inside rifle range. Boo. Too far for my purposes. Henley let fly with his Winchester, if only to put the lookout on notice. Again. We rambled on, closer. The lookout returned fire, at least one bullet chewing INT. Oh, the wall of the driver's box between Dusty and Henley. The man had to realize at this point we didn't intend to turn or stop. Almost there, the lookout raised his arm, but not holding the rifle. Instead, he pointed to the trees. Balancing on my knees, I placed my hands to the sides of my neck, symbol to symbol, and the world exploded, or rather the road in front of the horses exploded. The panicked team jerked to the left and off the road, wrenching the coach with it. The sudden momentum shift tipped us up on the left front wheel and shattered the axle. I fled to the right while the wagon tumbled onto its left side. I landed in the road, shattering something in my right shoulder and driving the air from my lungs. My hat was gone. Clouds of dust filled the air. Along with equine screams, I knew the cover wouldn't last long. Lungs burning, my right arm going cold, I dragged myself around the toppled coach, trying to put it between me and our attackers as I rounded the corner. The two lead horses of Dusty's team galloped by, nearly trampling me, dragging their torn leather traces. I took quick stock. The wheelers, still attached to the wagon by a tangle of leather and chain, were writhing and kicking on their sides. Dusty, holding himself up on one leg, was busy cutting them free before they hurt themselves beyond healing. Henley was crawling around on the ground. At first I thought he was senseless, but I quickly realized he was retrieving his scattered weapons and ammunition. As the fog dissipated from my brain, I realized my earlier mistake. The boy had been crouching in front of his horse, but it wasn't a saddlebag in front of him. It was a plunger box, wired to dynamite buried in the road. Their contingency plan in the event the coach didn't stop or turn toward the trees. The coach's top hatch, now a vertical doorway, popped open, ejecting Missa. "Are you well?" I panted. "You're half Emily?" "Yes," she said, brushing hair from her eyes. "All of us. Bring them out behind the coach. Put more wood and steel between them and the bullets." She nodded and ducked back into the darkness. St. Henley yelled. He was at the edge of the toppled driver's box, ducking out and taking quick shots with his rifle. "3 are coming from this side. The 4th will be here soon. From behind, it's now or never." I ran to the back end of the coach and peered. Emerging from the settling smoke and dust came 3 riders, rifles popping. "Stand down now," yelled the meat mountain. On the gray, "We have you dead to rights and more on the way." I took 3 quick breaths, gritted my teeth, and with a wheeze lifted my right hand up to the symbol on one side of my neck, and put my left hand on the symbol on the other side. The familiar agony filled my insides. Then, grimacing, I stepped out into the line of fire. I didn't say a word, just stared at the lookout, aiming his rifle at me. The magic swirled, focused. Suddenly, the lookout flinched, dropping the rifle and slamming his hands to his face with a howl. His partners looked over, one on each side, wondering if he'd been shot. If only, for then his agonized head shot straight from his body, like a Chinese rocket propelled by a spray of atomized blood. The tattered sphere, still wearing a black hat, flew a dozen feet up before landing and rolling lazily into a mud puddle. A few seconds later, his body slid off the horse. The boy froze in his saddle, screaming as if his Bible's admonitions had come to life. The man on the gray yelped unintelligibly and jumped off his horse, putting it between him and me. Luckily, I didn't need line of sight. I slid my left hand inside my coat, between the buttons of my linen shirt, touched the symbol over my heart. The electric insects boiled out of me. From behind the gray horse I heard a haunting, mournful cry. It must have spooked the horse because it kicked and galloped away, leaving a clear view of the devastation behind. The stocky man was vibrating, shaking like a leaf in a cyclone. His arms fell, ailing above his head. Blood seeped from every pore of his body and from his eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. But instead of dripping to the ground, it rose, carving hundreds of spidery pathways, a torrent of crimson teardrops pouring upward into a vortex. In the sky, the sound he made is perhaps best neither described nor remembered, but if compelled, I'd compare it to a squealing pig tumbling headlong down a sheer slope coated in glassy shards. At last, his body deflated, his remains collapsed into a ruined heap of pale, flaccid tissue. I turned robotically to the boy, and 3 thin G's happened at once. First, the boy fell from his horse, tossed his rifle, and threw himself, screaming, praying, and begging, prostrate on the dusty ground. Second, I heard caterwauling behind Emmy and turned to see the mother and her girls peeking around the back of the coach. The mother's face had drained of all color aside from the shimmering blue of her streaming eyes. She held her younger daughter's face crushed to her breast, and Missa looked on with what, at that harried, suspended moment, was an inscrutable expression. Third, the 4th rider came lurching up behind them, saw the devastation, cried something unintelligible, reared her horse, and turned for the hills. Unblinking, I raised my left hand to my mouth and touched the symbol on my tongue to the one on my palm. Around that obstruction, I whispered, as best I could, words of woe, of torture, of razor blades and magma, of stinging barbs and acid, of timeless, deathless pain. The 4th rider screamed and dropped from her horse. She held her hands to her ears, trying to block it out, but the sound was inside her. Make it stop. But it would not. She bah-ted at her invisible tormentors. Get out of my head. But they would not. Finally, her solution was to pull the bowie knife from her hip and plunge it into her own ear. I turned back to the boy, still grovely, Ng and weeping. Stop, said the mother finally. He's just a boy. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Baal Abbas wanted dessert. I slid my left hand into my shirt, again, popping to abalone buttons, until it rested on my belly, on another symbol. The bow burst into flames. White-hot hellfire, hissing 20 feet into the air, casting long shadows in the middle of the day. Mine fell on the young family. The boy didn't suffer long. I turned, drained. Dusty finally released the 2 trapped horses, and they leapt to their feet and ran into the trees. Henley pulled the mother into his arms, her baby between them. She buried her face in his chest. He wouldn't look at me, couldn't face the truth of his convictions. I discovered Missa at my feet. She handed me my hat. I like them. What, your decorations? They look like the daisies in my mom's garden. But when their season has passed and they're withered and ashen, thank why. Ooh, Missa hits Melissa, really. I like Missa, I like Crux. Her mouth smiled, but her eyes reflected the boy's smoldering remains. They told me to find this girl Olga, and in a few years, when she was old enough to assume a contract. Story 6, a hunger worth dying for. Simon is hungry for his big break. It hadn't taken him long to realize that getting his dream job as junior reporter was only half the battle. The other half was being assigned only the fluff pieces no one else wanted. Honestly, he thought, how many times can one man write about missing Nebu, rude strays? That's why he spends every Saturday night strolling the downtown streets until after midnight. Getting the drop on something like a shootout or a bank robbery would give him leverage to show his boss that he's a serious, respectable reporter capable of sniffing out good stories. Now he just needs to actually find one. Drunken couples and groups pass him until he's alone on the street once more. Suddenly, something in the tree line of the park caught his attention. A rustling, maybe a voice, he can't be sure. The glow of the street lamps only stretches so far. He watches the branches part, and someone steps through them It's a woman, and she's smiling. Guinevere is hungry for a lot of things, a good nap, a full-speed run tea, through the forest, a beach vacation, but mostly she's actually hungry, starving, really, or she was until several minutes ago. She can still taste the tang iron with a hint of cheap ale on her lips from the old tea-man who'd made the mistake of following her home. He'd assumed himself lucky as she led him to a dark forest, and was none the wiser until he saw her fangs. This feed was much needed. The satisfaction was so intense it made her light-headed, not a quick fix like a stray that needed putting out of its misery. Those were never as filling as they were depressing. One feels the energy return to her muscles and reinvigorate her, putting all her senses on edge, which is good, because the man in front of her definitely deserves her full attention. Thick, dark curly hair and deep bright eyes. She wonders if he's been following her, if he knows what she just did. Are you all right? He calls, brows furrowed in concern, when relaxes her shoulders. All he saw when he looked at her was a vulnerable, human woman, not a werewolf already looking for her next meal. Simon was, for once, speechless. The woman from the trees was gorgeous, flush, brown skin that glowed faintly in the moonlight. She was almost angelic, and it made him feel like he was dreaming. He tried to brush off these embarrassing thoughts and assess the situation. What was a young woman doing out here in the middle of the night? There didn't seem to be a good explanation. Are you all right? Yes, I'm just fine, thank you. She was petite and walked confidently towards him, and she wore a high-necked burgundy dress with curls piled atop her head. Wide brown eyes observed him. Does such a gentleman usually wait by the trees to watch young women on their nightly strolls? I was just passing by when I heard a noise. I wanted to make sure all was well. Why go out alone in such a dangerous neighborhood? This street in particular was lined with grubby pubs and shady businesses. The lady prefers a shortcut. Besides, I am not afraid. He couldn't believe this, not at all. She continued forward until she was used one step away. Though he looked down, her gaze still intimidated him. It was so magnetic he fought the urge to take another step closer. Does that sound so odd that you won't buy me a drink? He swallowed, standing taller. I'm technically working, but I suppose I could take a quick break. One has never been to this particular alehouse, but the intriguing man, Simon, apparently recommended it. Despite his preppy appearance, he was wearing a thick, knit cardigan under his trench coat. He blended in well. The barman immediately recognized him and gave him a drink on the house she asks about. This as they take their seats. I wrote about his son's bike getting stolen, which led to it getting returned. It was nothing, really, but he's very thankful. Her mouth quirked up. That's charming. Do you usually write about children's toys being taken? She liked how his cheeks got a little red when she teased him. He cleared his throat. I do. Actually, I'm a new reporter and don't exactly get the good tips. That's why I'm out tonight. Actually, to find a good story, make a name for myself. Gwen shifted in her seat. She wondered how he would react if he found that the best story he could ask for was sitting right across from him. That's a shame. What type of story are you looking for? He grinned sheepishly. I don't know. Something big and important. Something that changes the world. But all I get are the case of the missing strays. She stiffened. Oh, he told her about the neighborhood old ladies reported seeing less and less of them each week, though I'm sure it's just a rogue wolf, not exactly news. Suddenly the pub was overcrowded, too loud and too bright. She needed air. Listen, it's rather noisy in here, to you, Washington, and tea to go somewhere quiet. She loved how he pretended to have to think about it. Lead the way. Simon isn't used to this. Nothing is usually ever this easy. Her arm is looped through. Oh, his and they chat easily. He mostly tells her about his job, and she seems to prefer avoiding direct questions about herself, so he doesn't push it. Eventually, he realizes they're approaching his street. Reet, I must have walked towards my place without thinking. Forgive me, I'll walk you back. Where do you live close by? I'd like to see it. I never get to come this way. This is where a gentleman would politely reject her and insist on walking her home. He would ignore the hunger in her eyes and the lust crackling between them and send her off. What a night to find out he isn't a gentleman. Gwen likes his place. An apartment above a seamstress's, mostly full of messy book and newspaper piles. He gets her water from a tiny kitchen, and she waits in a tinier living room. Still, she likes it. Smells like him, earthy and clean. He looks nervous as he hands it to her. The preamble is always the most awkward part. Best to get it over with quickly. She downs the water cue, Euclid, and places it on the table. He watches wide-eyed as she undoes her belt, walking closer to him before turning around. Glancing over her shoulder, she asks softly, would you mind unbuttoning me? It proceeds smoothly from there. She enjoys the warmth of his mouth on her neck and the thrill of his roaming hands. He mumbles praises about the taste of her lips and the softness of her skin, and they entangle like they've known each other all their lives. The hunger is bone deep, urgent passion clawing out of her chest to get to him. Soon, she forgets anything else in the world exists. It's the kind of satisfaction that makes her realize she's been starving for it all her life. Gwen didn't care about Simon 5 hours ago, and now she's slipping out of his room before morning and can't stop herself from writing him a note about where to meet her next time, despite the little voice inside urging her not to. She tells herself just one more time, Simon is disappointed. From what he understands, you shouldn't be if your one-night stand slips out before breakfast, and yet this feeling is only softened by her note. It gives him something to think about all day, counting the minutes until he can see her again. Gwen smells him before she sees him. Both are wonderful sensations. The curve of his green eyes and his steady hands. She itches to reach for the M under the pub table. Simon's already blushing, to be honest. For a moment there I thought I'd never see you again. And this displeased you, S.H. He can't help the smirk. It would have displeased me too. I looked forward to tonight. It's the barest of compliments. But it makes him smile with victory, eyes locked on hers. What exactly were you looking forward to? They leave together before they've even finished their drinks. It continues on like this longer than she'd like to admit. Every night she watches him sleep and tries to convince herself to leave and never return. But she never can stop from giving home more of herself, like a spout that won't turn off. It's also getting harder to avoid his questions. She's made piac with being a pretend secretary at a pretend law firm, But still, he asks about her family. How could she possibly explain that she had to leave them behind centuries ago, after the turning, for their own safety? Sometimes it's all too stressful and worrisome, and she decides the next date will be their last. And then she feels the touch of his fingers and the heat of his body, and it's all forgotten, looking down at him from above, face flush against the pillows. She's sure she's never seen anyone so beautiful. That this ravenous hunger deep inside is only sated with him, even when they re just talking. That alone makes her feel more full than she's ever been. Still, she worries the closer they get, the more he'll wonder why full moons agitate her, or why sometimes she goes out alone at night and returns with blood on her dress, why only one of them ever seems to age. She watches him breathe and tries not to think about it. Simon is excited. He has a lead on a new story, one that he hasn't yet shared with Gwen. He wants to surprise her when it's finally published, tell her it's only possible because of her support, that she's unlike anyone he's ever met before. Then he'll finally ask her to be his, maybe even admit he's in love with her, if he's feeling brave enough. In a particularly rough neighborhood downtown, there had been a string of peculiar murders that no one seemed to paying much attention, likely, he figured, because the victims were all homeless drifters with a string of offenses under their belts, always seen last at some shady pub. He had to pay a pretty penny to the cop's secretary, Donna, to get an exclusive tip. Everybody was found with their flesh torn and mangled with bite marks, like some kind of animal or beast had attacked them. Now that was a story. The last two were found in alleyways in this area, even one in the thicket of trees not far from where he'd first met Gwen. He never did understand how she was so totally fearless, so unafraid of the dark. She just laughed and looked away whenever it came up, saying, "I'm not scared of the boogeyman." He wondered if she knew what was really lurking these streets. He decided to warn her soon. A sound knocked him from his daydreams, the rattling of a metal trash can, a deep grunt. It was hard to make it out with only sparse street lights and the cloud-covered moonlight. Still, his heart pounded. Donna's words had rattled him. Surely she's kidding, he thought, and yet the gravity in her eyes had struck him as entirely real. Maybe it was a rabid animal or a human predator, but what kind of human could inflict the kind of damage she described? He told himself to relax. It's probably just a raccoon or a lady of the night. And yet the moaning wasn't pleasured. It was haunting. Guttural instinct told him to run. Instead, he steadied himself and took several steps into the alleyway. At first, there were only shadows and dumpsters. And then Simon heard it. Deep, heavy breathing, a slow dripping, strained breaths, a growl, getting louder now. Simon backed away, slowly, calm only by virtue of the fact that this thing hadn't seen him. He was only a step away from the safety of the main street when his foot sent a glass bottle rolling. Wide eyes snap, head up to meet his through the darkness, and sharp canines glinted in the light. Simon realized that whatever it was held an unconscious man against the wall before letting him hit the ground. Then it started head towards Simon. He panicked, rushing towards the street, when he accidentally stepped on another glass bottle and fell backwards. He heard his head slam the concrete before he felt it, forcing himself to sit up. He scooted frantically backwards until he hit a wall. The sidewalk was no more than 4 feet to his right, but it felt like a world away. The beast stalked closer, snarling, "Gee," with every movement, and he realized then it walked on all fours. Simon was horrified to learn just then that it was possible for blood to literally run cold. As a chill flooded his body, he forced himself to breath, to not close his eyes. On the odd chance he survived, he needed to remember every detail for his future book. The beast had brown eyes, long fur, a snout. The closer it got, the more Simon saw it for what it was, a wolf, a ginormous one by any standards, but still. It pressed closer until its face was inches from his, blood still dripping from its mouth. He waited, tense and horrified for the bite to come, but the animal only sniffed him for what felt like an eternity. Finally, mercifully, it backed up, turned around, and ran off into the night. One can't breathe. It had taken her longer than she'd like for her wolf mind to recognize Simon. She remembered sniffing him, the way the memories and emotions burst through like a flood of color. Not him, she pleaded from the back of her mind. Not him. It was like screaming inside a soundproof room. Eventually, somehow, she forced herself to run, not stopping until she reached farmland. That night had been sleepless. She thought of her own turning, being grabbed in the park, the sharp pain, her screams getting lost on the wind, the nights of agony and confusion. She remembers because she'd almost turned Simon tonight. Now, that impulse brings her shame. I can't do that to him. She'd seen his horrified face when he saw her true form, and the and she'd killed. Gwen had been walking home earlier that night, human as ever, when she'd heard a scream. A woman trying to fight a man off in the alley. She doesn't remember shifting. She just remembers jumping on him, teeth first, smiling when the woman get away, and then suddenly Simon was there. The next night she stops by his place directly, itching to see him again, but no one was home. Dejected, she walks back out onto the dark street. Only then does she realize how full the moon is. That's why it's been harder to resist the urges lately. Why she could shift so easily between forms. She prays it's over soon. Sometimes she thinks she can only truly relax when the moon is dark. The urges come again soon, as she's walking aimlessly down another road. If she had more self-respect, she'd admit she was pub-hopping to see if Simon was out on a date. Luckily and disappointingly, there was no sign of him. She walked the sidewalk along the park until she heard the sound of a harsh slap, a man berating and shaking a woman, screaming about money and loyalty. Gwen pounced at him before she knew what was happening. She was vaguely aware of the woman running off as she held the man on the ground. She savored biting into him until a blow to her side knocked her off him and onto the ground. She heard voices, watched the man stand up and run off, but she couldn't chase him. She couldn't move at all. She sensed another figure coming closer as a warm pool of blood spread around her middle. The stinging made her realize with an odd sort of acceptance. Oh, it must have been a silver bullet. The shooter kneeled over her then, looking into her eyes with an odd look. Something about him pulled at all her senses. until it clicked, and she realizes that Simon just shot her. Simon can't believe it. He'd been so thrilled to catch the rogue beast in action, to stop it from hurting anyone else. He spent all day at the library and oddity shops preparing for tonight with these special bullets, planning to take down the beast, publish his big story, and celebrate with Gwen. And then he looked into the Wolf's eyes and realized why they seemed so familiar, why they looked right into his soul. And he realizes then that he just shot Gwen. Simon reached delicately for her soft face, shock and horror twisting in his gut. Is it really? As if answering him, the shift began, and suddenly human Gwen was in his lap. Simon wrapped his trench coat around her naked forearm, the dark red bullet wound. He remembered how touching her used to set his soul on fire, bringing every part of him to life. Now she just felt cold. I didn't know. Gwen, I'm sorry. I love you. I'm sorry. Her face tipped up, the trace of a smile on her lips. Gently, she says, I know. And then her eyes close, and she is gone. Only after Simon's death, decades later, does his daughter get a letter from his estate lawyer directing her to a locked box. Inside is a stack of paper with a note on top. It's time. Please publish this. On the front page is one word, the title, When. Story 7. Salt, fat, acid, blood. The studio apartment smelled of mildew and old smoke, wallpaper peeling in strips like dead skin. At the center of the room sat a table scarred by years of neglect. An empty plate and glass rested upon it. Sitting at the table, a knife and fork in each hand, he stared at the plate, licking his lips, waiting for a meal that will never come. Imagining the weight of sourdough bread, the steam coming off a piping hot bowl of tomato soup, the salty fattiness of a good ribeye steak. He remembers the warmth of food filling his belly, the simple pleasure of hunger answered. But memory was all he had now. The knife and fork shook slightly in his grip, not from weakness, but from the futility of the gesture. Silence pressed in, broken only by the hum of a dying refrigerator and the distant drip of a leaky pipe. Shadows clung to the corners of the apartment, thick and watchful. With a slow exhale, he set the utensils down onto the plate, the sound of metal against porcelain sharp in the stillness. Standing up, the chair scraping across the warped floorboards, he moved toward the door, grabbing his long coat off the coat rack before us, stepping out into the empty hallway. The plate and glass remained behind, mute symbols of a life abandoned. Outside, the chilled wind clawed at his open coat, snapping the fabric against his legs as he walked along the deserted street. Neon signs flickered above shuttered shops, their colors bleeding into puddles that neared a city too tired to care. His footsteps echoed alley on the sidewalk, each step a reminder of the endless nights he had walked, searching for meaning in a life stripped of warmth. Once he had been a man with choices in his life, with mornings. Now he was only a shadow, drifting along from streets to alleys where even the rats seemed to avoid him. The wind carried whispers of memory, the taste of wine, the sound of laughter, a love, ours voice, a future he could never have. He pulled his coat closed around him, though the cold was nothing to him any longer. It was habit, a gesture of humanity he could not quite of. And then a scream, sharp and sudden, slicing through the night, a woman's voice, raw with terror, echoing from somewhere ahead. He stopped and tilted his head, listening. the sound vibrating through him like a summons. Every sense in him sharpened. The street seemed to hold its breath, and for a moment the city was silent except for that cry. Still ringing in his mind, he felt his hunger stir, not for food, but for the pulse of life, and sprinted forward towards the cries of helplessness. The scream led into a narrow alley. A single street light buzzed at the mouth, its glow too weak to fully pierce the darkness within. The walls were thick with grime, graffiti bleeding into shadows, the stench of rot clinging to the air. A middle-aged woman struggled, pressed again, Saint the brick, her breath ragged, eyes wide with terror. A gaunt figure loomed over her, his left hand pushing on her shoulder, keeping her against the wall. A junkie with hollow cheeks, a knife, he flashing in the dim light in his trembling right hand. He snarled, "I'm not going to tell you again. Give me your purse." As he clawed at the handbag, the woman clutched tightly to her chest, refusing to comply to the junkie's demand. His desperation curdled into violence. The blade struck, a quick, brutal motion. Her cry split the night once again. He stepped from the shadows, his presence sudden, immense, as if the darkness itself had given him form. His coat flared from the wind whisking through the alley, the fabric whispering like wings. The junkie froze, knife still in hand, eyes darting to the figure that seemed less man than apparition. "Go away," the junkie screeched, pointing the red glistened knife at the shadowed figure. "Whatever he's got in that bag is mine." Ignoring the junkie, his gaze fixed on the blood blooming against the woman's clothes. The scent hit him like a thunderous storm. Iron, salt, life, hunger surged, clawing at the emptiness inside him. He turned his stare at the junkie, contempt for the fragile predator before him. This mortal who thought himself dangerous, and started to move towards him. Back off, the junkie spat, sounding defiant. Though the grip on his knife faltered, ignoring the junkie, he moved closer, each step deliberate. The sound of his boots echoing off the walls like a tolling bell. Shadows bent around him, swallowing the alley until only he and the junkie shaking in his wake remained in its center. The woman slid down the wall, grasping at her wound, her eyes flicking between her attacker and the man. Advancing from the dark, she watched, sensing that something far worse than a knife had arrived. He stopped a breath away from the junkie, his face pale, eyes gleaming with a hunger that was not quite human. The knife shook fiercely in the junkie's hand, useless now, a tool before a predator, moving faster than sight. In an instant, the blade was forgotten, clattering to the ground as cold hands seized the junkie's arms in an iron grip. His breath caught, a strangled sound, before the vampire's fangs found his throat. Piercing flesh, the rush of blood filling his mouth, hot, coppery, laced with the bitter tang of chemicals. It was sustenance, but tainted. A cocktail of despair and addiction that burned as much as it nourished. He vampire drank, tasting the ruin of a life wasted. The junkie convulsed, his body trembling against the vampire's grip. Somewhere behind them, a door slammed. Footsteps echoing down the alley. The vampire's head snapped up, senses flaring, the taste of blood still fresh on his tongue. In that moment of distraction, the junkie's desperation turned to defiance. His teeth sank into his assailant's hand, tearing skin, drawing a dark stream of inhuman blood. He swallowed, eyes widening as the taste hit him. Ancient, potent, alive with a power beyond comprehension. The vampire hissed a sound like stone grinding against stone, and wrenched his hand free, but the damage had been done. Shadows recoil, the alley itself seeming to shudder at the exchange. The junkie staggered back, falling on his ass, blood smeared across his mouth, eyes wild, fevered, as if the taste had ignited something feral inside. The woman lay slumped against the wall, watching with terror as predator and prey blurred into something more dangerous. The vampire's hunger roared, but in one small fleeting moment he had given the junkie a taste of eternity, and the night suddenly felt heavier, charged with consequences he had not intended. Eyes closed, head swimming, the junkie finally opened them and looked around. He was alone, except for the woman he had stabbed lay on her side against the wall. She was not moving. Good, he thought. That's what you get for not helping me out, bitch. Slowly standing, he felt sick, no worse than sick. He felt lick. He was at death's door, bracing against the wall so as not to fall. He stumbled through the alley, throat raw from the scream that never left his lips. The veins in his neck still burned with the memory of fangs pressing into them, yet beneath the weakness was a strange fire, the taste of stolen blood. It coated his tongue like ash, but it throbbed in him, a rhythm not his own. The city blurred. Neon signs flickered like dying stars. Shadows stretched. He followed them until the darkness gave way, and the abandoned house he was squatting in rose up before him, once a shelter, now a den of ruin, windows cracked and broken, the walls tattooed with graffiti and despair. He dragged himself inside, greeted by the stench of smoke, sweat, and decay. He saw others sprawled on the floor, but our faces blurred. Were they friends, strangers, corpses? He could not tell. His mind clawed at the edges of memory, but everything slipped away. He collapsed, and the rotting floorboards beneath him seemed to breathe. His body convulsed, his breath rattled, his heart slowed. The taste of blood lingered, metallic and wrong, but it was not just on his tongue. The fire in his veins spread as, hearing, reshaping, he clawed at the boards, nails splitting as the last of his mortal pulse ebbed away, and darkness swallowed him whole. When his eyes opened, they gleamed with hunger. The junkie that hungered for his next fix was gone. A junkie that hungered for something else had risen in his place. For weeks he had scoured the city's veins, alleys, forgotten corners, searching for the one who had tasted his blood, a junkie whose blood was as toxic as battery acid. If the vampire had drank any more of it, he was sure he would have overdosed. It took him days as it was to come off the high he was on from drinking such poison. Each night ended in failure, the trail dissolving away and only silence remaining. The hunger gnawed at him, but worse was the unease, the knowledge that somewhere was a monster he had mistakenly unleashed upon the city. He had seen the reports of people that have gone missing, too many people in the past weeks for it to be a coincidence. Tonight the wind howled across the rooftops, carrying the scent of rain and rust. He crouched on the roof's edge of some crumbling building, coat flaring behind him like a comic book superhero. But he was no hero. He was a monster as well, and he knew it. Below, the streets sprawled in darkness, broken only by the occasional flicker of neon. He saw her then, a woman doctor, drifting along the pavement, her steps uneven, her head bowed as though sleepwalking, her hair hung in a tangled mess, her clothes soiled, the breeze carrying the stench of decay up to where he crouched. Something about her was wrong. That was obvious enough, but there was more. The way she swayed, the pallor of her skin, the faint tremor in her hands. It was the mark of corruption. He knew it all too well. Somehow she managed to escape. He stood up, silent, and stepped off the rooftop. The wind howled around him as he descended onto the street, shadows folding around high. The woman staggered onward, unaware of his presence. He watched for a moment from the shadows. She staggered under a flickering street light, her eyes glassy, her movements uncertain. He stepped from the shadows, and she froze, as though the night itself had seized her. Where is he? His voice was low, velvet edged with steel. Her lips quivered, but no words came. He moved it closer, the chill of his presence pressing against her. You reek of him, the one I hunt. His corruption stains you, he whispered, nostrils flaring. Her gaze darted away, but his hand caught her chin, forcing her eyes to meet his. The hunger in them was not so much for blood, but for truth. Tell me, he commanded, each syllable heavy with compulsion. She shuddered. What Ressie stance she had left crumbled beneath the weight of his will. He's in the old house, she stammered. The Victorian abandoned, his grip loosened, but his gaze did not. Take me there, he ordered. Her knees buckled, but he steadied her, not out of kindness, but necessity. She looked into his eyes, her own eyes pleading, not wanting to go back there. The fire in his eyes blazed, and she slowly nodded, compelled, turning around, heading back the way she came down the darkened street. The vampire followed, his coat whispering against the wind, his shadow stretching long behind them. The city seemed to recoil as they moved, the silence deepening. Ahead, the silhouette of the Victorian house rose against the night, the windows, hollow eyes staring back at him. At last the vampire whispered, his lips curled into something between a smile and a snarl. The woman halted, quickly sobering up from her ordeal, staring at the looming Victorian facade, the spires clawed at the sky. Recognition struck her like a blow to the stomach, her dazed expression turning into a deep-seated fear. She started backing away. No, I won't go back in there, she said, her voice breaking. He turned to her, but she was already fleeing into the night, her footsteps fading into silence. He did not try to stop her. She showed him the lair of the monster. That was enough. His gaze returned to the house and moved toward it. He lingered at the door, the paint-blistered hinges rusted, as if to ward off any entry. With a slow push, the door opened and he stepped inside. The air was thick, stagnant, heavy with the stench of rot. Wallpaper sagged, the patterns obscured by mold. Floorboards groaned beneath his weight, each step stirring dust that glittered faintly in the moonlight seeping through cracked panes. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint scuttle of unseen vermin. He moved from room to room. In the parlor, broken furniture lay scattered, cushions torn open, their stuffing spilled out like entrails. In the kitchen, rusted pots hung from hooks, the sink clogged with brackish water that stank of decay. Every corner reeked of death, the scent clinging to the walls like a curse. Opening a door, he descended the staircase to the basement, each step creaking beneath him. The deeper he went, the stronger the stench became. He paused at a second closed door and listened. A faint sound drifted from the other side, a wet rasp of breath, a shuffle of movement. Turning the knob, he pushed the door, letting the momentum open it. The air was thick, almost suffocating, with the copper tang of blood and the sourness of decay. Bodies lay strewn across the floor. Some were slumped against the walls, each sprawled in grotesque positions, like they were discarded after use, lifeless and pale, their eyes staring blankly into the dark, each body in some degree of decomposition, going by CK weeks there. Amid the carnage he stood, the junkie that used to be human. His skin was sallow, his eyes a feverish glint, his mouth smeared crimson. He looked up grinning, the expression twisted by hunger and madness. "You came," the creature rasped, a sound of both triumph and ruin. The vampire's gaze locked on him. Cold and unyielding shadows pressed close. The basement seemed to shrink around them. The hunt was over. Time to end this, he thought. Without warning, the junkie vampire lunged at him, a feral snarl tearing from his throat. His movements were erratic, and the vampire met him head-on, their collision shaking dust from the rafters. The basement became a storm of shadows and broken bodies. The creature fought with desperation, clawing, biting, his strength unnatural. But undisciplined, the vampire's blows were precise, each strike carrying decades of predatory instinct. Yet the thing did not go down easily. Each time he was thrown aside, he rose again, grinning through blood and madness. They crashed against the stone walls, splintering wood, scattering lifeless bodies across the floor, the air thick, dead with the stench of death and the metallic smell of fresh wounds. Being thrown through the basement door, the junkie roared and hurled himself up the stairs, fleeing on to the main floor. He vampire followed, boots pounding, shadows chasing them both. In the parlor, broken furniture became weapons, the junkie wielding jagged wood like a spear. The vampire tore it out of his hands and snapped it in two. The house groaned under their struggle. Windows rattled, plaster crumbled. The junkie's laughter echoed, manic, defiant, even as the vampire's grip closed around its throat. "You gave me this. I am what you made," the creature spat, eyes flaring. The vampire's silence was colder than any denial. He dragged the junkie through the ruined hall, each step inexorable, the fight reduced to a predator hauling prey. The junkie clawed, bit, cursed, but the vampire did not relent. The front door burst open as night was giving way to dawn. Pale light spilled across the street, the horizon bleeding into a golden hue. He forced the junkie outside, into the rising sun. The creature screamed, a sound that split the morning, his body convulsing as sunlight struck him. His skin blistered, his strength faltered, and the manic laughter died in his throat. The vampire held him fast, watching as the stolen immortality burned away, leaving only ash. The street was empty and silent, save for the vampire standing there in the new day, with ashes of a tormented soul drifting away on the morning breeze. He lifted his face as the sun climbed higher, its pale fire spilling across the rooftops, as he waited for the inevitable. But nothing happened. The light pressed against his skin, warm, but not consuming. By all rights the sun should have burned him to nothing, should have ended the endless hunger, but the fire was slow, delayed. As though reluctant to claim him, he closed his eyes and thought of the lives devoured, the faces forgotten. He thought of the junkie's laughter, the corruption because of his carelessness, and wondered if this was his punishment, to linger, to wait, to feel the sun hesitate. The warmth deepened, creeping into his bones, but still it did not consume. He stood, not moving, coat torn, hand blotted, a relic of hunger staring into the dark. When the world was changing, and he was caught between the light and the darkness, uncertain if there was any true end or another beginning,